tonight. Clashes in Syria as Kurdish Christians fearing genocide prepare for the end of a highly touted ceasefire.
The military's job is to prepare options and then present them to the president and let him decide.
This as the U.S. announces some troops will stay in Syria as others head to Iraq. Plus,
that sounds preposterous.
Eric Metaxas thinks Democrats could bring an old foe onto the field against President Trump.
And speaking of division,
let's agree to disagree and move on.
I hate that statement.
These two women give advice on how to disagree gracefully.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A reversal for American troops in Syria? Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. The clock is running out for the ceasefire in Syria, putting Christian Kurds fearing genocide in clear and present danger.
And now President Trump is contemplating a new plan to keep troops in the eastern part of the country. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us now with tonight's top story. Ben?
Well, John, Jenna, if that ceasefire continues in the region, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper said that American forces would mostly be redeployed to Iraq. And just this morning, a military convoy was seen driving through northern Iraq after leaving Syria.
I don't want to leave troops there. It's very dangerous.
President Trump discussed that report while meeting with cabinet members as the ceasefire approaches its Tuesday deadline. But it ends tomorrow. If the Syrian Democratic Forces haven't left their designated areas by then, Turkish President Erdogan has promised to crush Kurdish heads.
So right behind me is a horrific sight. The Syrians that have come in here from Tal Tamr are digging bodies out of the rubble from this house that was struck by a bomb. They've so far recovered 4 bodies, and they're just about to pull one more.
The Kurds report more than 200 civilians have been killed, including 18 children. Turkish fighters claim they've killed more than 700 terrorists.
We're working with the Kurds. We have a good relationship with the Kurds. But we never agreed to, protect the Kurds. We fought with them for 3.5 to 4 years. We never agreed to protect the Kurds for the rest of their lives.
This as the president is leaning in favor of a new Pentagon plan to keep a small force of American troops in eastern Syria. Those soldiers would fight Islamic State terrorists and even prevent Syrian or Russian forces from taking oil fields in Kurdish-held territory.
Not only are we going to deny the oil fields falling into Iranian hands, I believe we're on the verge of a joint venture between us and the Syrian Democratic Forces who helped destroy ISIS.
Now, the president's remarks comes as officials from his administration are set to testify this week on Capitol Hill. On Tuesday, Ambassador William Taylor, the top U.S. diplomat to Ukraine, will face questions from House Democrats who seek to impeach Trump. Then on Wednesday, Philip Reker will be in the hot seat. Now, he's the top State Department official who deals with Ukraine. John, Jenna?
All right, Ben Kennedy at the White House, thank you. Well, today on the Hill, I spoke with Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna from California. We talked about a range of topics, including Syria, impeachment, and election 2020. With the ceasefire about to end, do you think the situation with Turkey and the Kurds is improving?
Well, we have a moral responsibility to the Kurds. They fought with us against ISIS. We can't sit by while 1.7 million people are displaced. I'm glad that there was a ceasefire, but I'm concerned. What is Turkey going to do now? And a solution can't be expel 1.7 million Kurds from northern Syria.
What message do you think this move sends to the rest of the world?
We can't send a message to the rest of the world that if you're an ally and fight with us against terrorism, then when the going gets tough, we're going to abandon you.
Some of the troops that were withdrawn from Syria are now being moved to Iraq. Your thoughts on this?
I do think it's important for us to have some presence in the region so that we don't see a resurgence of ISIS. But I'm hopeful that we will bring all of our troops eventually, or as many of our troops eventually, home.
In this last Democratic debate, they had a tough time nailing Elizabeth Warren down on how she would pay for Medicare for all and if she would raise taxes on the middle class. What did you make of some of her answers and how she handled those questions?
I do think you have to level with the American public of how you're going to pay for it. I understand that Senator Warren now is coming out with a financing plan, and I think that's a good thing.
On the impeachment inquiry, last week was a big week. It was behind closed doors, though, and there's been a lot of criticism of that. What do you say to people who say they're concerned about the secrecy of this impeachment inquiry?
Some of the depositions that are taking place, they have to be done in private because some of the individuals who are testifying don't want to be public about it. Their jobs are on the line, their safety is on the line. But I do think in that process, Republicans and Democrats should both get the chance to answer questions, and there should be no leaks. We can't have members of Congress coming out and trying to characterize the statements, and that I think Congress needs to do a better job with, to say no characterization of these witnesses. Let's do the investigation, and then you can have a public hearing later on.
And Representative Khanna is the national co-chair of Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's been rising in the polls, is promising new expensive programs on everything like the environment, education, and health care. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson attended a recent town hall where Warren talked about her plans and answered Abby's question about possibly revoking the tax-exempt status of churches who oppose same-sex marriage.
Senator Elizabeth Warren is gaining national momentum with her aggressive grassroots campaign and progressive platform, calling for Medicare for all, bold initiatives to address climate change, and breaking up big banks and big tech.
And let me tell you where big structural change starts. It starts by attacking corruption head on. You ready?
Speaking to a crowd of about 4,000, Warren laid out plans for canceling student debt and getting rid of college tuition.
And we can provide tuition-free technical school, 2-year college, and 4-year college for anyone who wants to get an education.
In promising all this and more, she plans a wealth tax on anyone with more than $50 million in assets who would pay an additional amount for each dollar over $50 million.
2 cents. And we can make an investment in an entire generation.
But other candidates challenge her plans and the math, particularly covering Medicare for all.
At least Bernie's being honest here and saying how he's going to pay for this and that taxes are going to go up. And I'm sorry, Elizabeth, but you have not said that. And I think we owe it to the American people to tell them where we're going to send the invoice.
Many at the town hall tell CBN News they're on board with universal health care.
I think that the arguments against giving people a fair shot at health care are ridiculous.
I do think that health care should be something that we consider as a right and not a privilege.
And believe she'll find a way to pay for it.
I think that, she has a plan, and there are much smarter people than me thinking about it, so.
Even if it means higher taxes for the middle class.
We're already paying it.
Other Virginia Democrats still don't know whom they'll support.
I think we need to have somebody who is willing to not only appeal to those who are more liberal, but also to those middle of the road. So I don't know who that person is.
Candidate Beto O'Rourke recently made headlines for this answer on whether or not churches and religious institutions should lose their tax-exempt status if they oppose same-sex marriage.
Yes. There can be no reward, no benefit, no tax break for anyone or any institution, any organization in America that denies the full human rights and the full civil rights of every single one of us.
Warren told CBN News she disagrees.
We have a long tradition in our country of permitting churches to make their own decisions about how they worship. I respect that tradition, and I would not change it.
With the first caucuses still a few months away, the question remains if Senator Warren can maintain her steady rise in the polls through when it matters most. Reporting from Norfolk, Virginia, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thank you, Abby. We'll stick around for our exciting panel as we discuss Campaign 2020 and a presidential prayer in today's cabinet meeting.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
It's what starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Welcome back. Time now for our panel. Joining us today, CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody and veteran and award-winning journalist Ray Suarez, former senior PBS NewsHour correspondent and current host of World Affairs. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thank you, John. Great to see you.
Let's start off with a new poll showing front-runner Joe Biden in potential trouble in Iowa. Joe Biden has 18%, Elizabeth Warren nipping at his heels at 17%, and South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg surging ahead at 13%. Ray, David, I'd love to get you both to comment on this, but what are we to make of these numbers? Ray, starting with you.
Well, look, it's still months before people wander through the snow to school gymnasiums and other places to caucus with their neighbors. In a field this big, it's not just politics, it's mathematics. It's going to be fluid. You can win with 18 to 20, 22% of the vote. Mm-hmm. You can win the first several primaries with results that bad. So I wouldn't put... It's interesting, the movement. Who's up, who's down, who's shaving points, who's adding them, but it doesn't tell you anything determinative about Iowa.
And Biden is down 6, and Elizabeth Warren's up 4 in Iowa overall. Buttigieg in third place. That's a nice place for him to be because he needs to be in that 3 or 4 spot coming out of Iowa.
So Bernie Sanders just recovering from a heart attack. Congressman Ro Khanna, who we had on earlier, he says his candidate is back. Ray, what do you think? Are we seeing Bernie Sanders, the revival of Bernie Sanders?
Well, he looked pretty solid when he did his rally in Queens the other day. Huge crowd there, an endorsement from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You know, if he says, unless there's good evidence to the contrary, if he says he's okay, we have to take him at face value. It's hard to run for president, I mean physically. Mm-hmm. It's hard to be president. Mm-hmm. So it's reasonable to ask if he's better.
A quick 10 seconds on that. Can I just say, everybody made a big deal of the crowd, 26,000 in New York. Okay, hold on. Ray, you're from New York, right? Mm-hmm. Right? It's a liberal town, 2 ultra-liberals speaking, and they're giving liberal orthodoxy. So, I mean, we would expect 26,000 people in liberal New York City to hear liberals speak. Perhaps. I mean, it kind of makes sense.
Perhaps even more.
Yeah.
Well, the White House still playing cleanup after a rough week last week, including the acting chief of staff slip, mounting pressure on Syria, and the G7 reversal on Doral. David, are we beginning to see the GOP, some of the GOP, break with the administration?
I think that's a little overblown. I know there was a big story in the Washington Post today. Look, Lindsey Graham had some tough words, but Lindsey Graham, you know, well, that's significant. Don't get me wrong. But then if you look deeper into the article, they're talking about a House member or 2 that might be off the reservation. I think it bears watching. I'm not sure if it's actually this big deal at this point. It does bear watching, though.
So Beto O'Rourke, he said that he would like to see churches lose their tax-exempt status if they don't support same-sex marriage. Today, Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson, he weighed in on church and state matters during a prayer at a cabinet meeting. We have sound of that. Let's listen to that, and we'll get your reaction.
help us all to recognize as a nation that separation of church and state means that the church does not dominate the state, and it means the state does not dominate the church. It doesn't mean that they cannot.
Ray, this could become a 2020 issue.
And it sure could, and maybe all the other candidates should mug Beto O'Rourke on the way out of a debate one day, because after 20 years of saying, we're not going to mess with your interior operations, and 20 years of saying, we're not coming for your guns, and we're not going to bother the churches, O'Rourke is overturning all those orthodoxies. He's just one candidate polling in, at 3%, but it's a problem.
Yeah, and Beto's going to take your guns, too, by the way, while you're at church. So there you go. So, yeah, he's been a disaster for the Democrats having to answer this, though Elizabeth Warren answered it in Abby's piece, saying she does not agree with Beto O'Rourke on this. Good move if you're going to run in the general election, for sure.
All right, David and Ray, thank you both very much.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
When we come back, why a major evangelical Christian author thinks Hillary Clinton could jump into the 2020 race.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
Administering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
A 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to CBNNewsChannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News. Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Well, Eric Metaxas is a Christian radio host and a New York Times best-selling author and a friend of the show.
Recently, he sat down with us here at the table and had a lot to say about President Trump, the Democrats, and one big name in the party, Hillary Clinton.
Well, Eric Metaxas is a radio host and best-selling author with his latest book called Donald Builds the Wall, and he joins us now. Eric, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get to your book, but talk a little bit of news of the day first. You know, Donald Trump deciding to pull troops from Syria. What's your reaction?
Well, I think he's obliged to make his case more clearly on why he thinks it was worth doing when there was such a chorus of voices from his supporters who thought that this was problematic.
This impeachment inquiry, the Democrats are moving forward with this.
Yeah.
You know, do you think their concerns about potential quid pro quo are legitimate, or is this, as Donald Trump calls it, a witch hunt?
I think there's huge quid pro quo on the other side, and I do think it's a witch hunt. I think, listen, every president in conversations with world leaders will say things that they don't expect to be broadcast to the world in a transcript. Some presidents play it fast and loose, and no one plays things faster and looser than Trump. So I think once you parse every syllable and then try to read it as though it was spit out by a computer, it's very confusing. The fact of the matter is, on the surface of it, it doesn't look to me like what they're calling a quid pro quo. And it certainly doesn't look like the kind of thing over which you impeach a president. I think it's ridiculous. What I think is going to happen is that this is going to boomerang, and a lot of the things that would not have come to light, a lot of the corruption on the Democratic side, the situation with Joe Biden's son, and many other things like that will be exposed as a result of this. But I think the idea that Nancy Pelosi and others would pretend that they must impeach the president over this is patently ridiculous. And sometimes things are pure politics. And as far as I'm concerned, when things are pure politics, it's ugly. Everybody loses.
There's a crop of candidates who are campaigning to challenge President Trump in 2020. Which of these candidates do you think stands the best chance? Are there any that you think can mount a good challenge against him?
I don't think it's possible for any of the current crop to beat this president. I think it's possible that they really would call Hillary Clinton in, from the locker room onto the field. That sounds preposterous, and in many ways it is preposterous. But I think that they are not. They haven't fielded a good team, so to speak. They're in big trouble.
Thank you so much for being with us. We always learn a lot when you're here with us.
Oh, you're very kind. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Eric.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5 Wednesday night at 9:30.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Well, if it feels like America has grown more divided, it's because it has. A new survey shows Republicans and Democrats view each other negatively, and more so since the 2016 election. Republicans who give Democrats a negative rating has risen 14 points overall, describing Democrats as closed-minded, unpatriotic, and immoral. The trend is similar for Democrats, 75% of whom describe the GOP as closed-minded. They also call them immoral and unintelligent. One thing on which partisans see eye to eye, however, their inability to agree on basic facts. Well, as you can imagine, in that climate, engaging in tough conversations with people of differing political views isn't always easy, but the authors of the book, I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening, say we should be doing just that.
Yeah, I like the title. Recently, I sat down with Beth Silvers and Sarah Stewart Holland to talk about how to talk about those difficult conversations. The tagline of your book is a guide to grace-filled political conversations. Those seem to be lacking in today's culture. Beth, what does a grace-filled conversation, political conversation, look like today?
We talked a lot about whether we wanted to use the word grace, because it's a word that we use among ourselves all the time at Pantsuit Politics. And a lot of people said, why don't you just talk about civility? And we realized we're talking about something deeper than civility. This is not just let's be nice and kind in these conversations. Sometimes grace requires a really firm stance. What we wanted to convey with grace-filled political conversations are conversations that connect you to your values, so that we make sure no matter what we're talking about, how contentious it gets, we are fundamentally operating out of a sense of our most treasured values.
So it's not about backing off your values, but having an understanding of the other person's values?
Well, you know, sometimes the conversation is going to have to happen before you can understand the person's values. But what we really want to push people to do is represent their values not just in their policy positions, but how they engage about those policy positions, how you treat the other person, how you talk about the other person. Those reflect your values as well.
What are some very practical tips you could give people?
The first thing we want people to remember is that the goal is not to emerge from the Thanksgiving table with draft legislation. We come together and connect over politics because they do offer us spaces to explore how we live in community with each other, and that's relevant to our families. So we want people to have these conversations, but we just want them to understand the goal isn't to convince anyone. You don't need to walk away all agreeing on who you're going to vote for. It should be a curious exploration, especially when you've grown up in the same house with someone who sees things so differently than you. It's great to say, I wonder how this happened. You know, we have so much in common in our background. Why do you think we see this so differently?
So do you agree or disagree with this statement? Let's agree to disagree and move on.
I hate that statement. I hate that sound because it feels like it's shutting down the conversation. Beth was saying this just the other day. The reason I think we both have such strong reactions is because it sounds like we're done here. We're not going to talk about this. And that's the opposite of what we want. What we want people to do is say, okay, I think maybe it's become too heated right now, but I care about what you think. And I want to continue this conversation later. I want to continue to talk about the issues in our countries that matter, the values that are important to us, and maybe even become better versed in why we disagree, or maybe even find some agreement.
Why do you think the concept of grace is such a hard concept in today's culture? There seems to be so little of it.
Every message that we get is you're a consumer of what's in front of you. Especially through social media, we're trained to give things a thumbs up or a thumbs down immediately. And grace asks us to hold a lot of room around everything. Even if I disagree, you're still a person I value and respect in my life. Even if I think this policy position is wrong, I want to hear it out and see what I can learn from it. Grace has that element of we belong. And nothing else around us enforces that sense that things belong, even if we don't love them.
So what about the really sticky issues that we are talking about today? You know, whether it's gun violence or abortion or really polarizing issues. How do people navigate those conversations?
Sometimes it's best to approach the conversation like a reporter, like somebody who's just curious to learn, to think, where did you get that information from? Is there anything I could say that would help you see this issue differently? Or sometimes what I like to do is go really, really far out. How does this play historically? Is this different than how somebody 100 years ago would have talked about it? Just giving some bigger, wider perspective to the issues and not see it as just a debate where we have to convince one another.
Jenna, a great interview and some great advice.
Thank you. All right, well, that's going to do it for Faith Nation.